What's up guys, it's Lord Botha here with another video, and as you can see, the Game Awards have posted their nominees for their awards, and you can see this right here. These are the nominees for Game of the Year. Now, there were a lot of controversial nominations, a lot of things that were left out of being nominated that probably should have been, across all different wide varieties of categories. But the Game of the Year is probably going to be the one that's most talked about because, of course, it is sort of the kind of magnum opus of the award show. You have some games on there that totally make sense from both a sales and critic standpoint. Things like Astrobot, Black Myth Wukong, which this list originally didn't actually spell right, because that's just how much disdain modern media has for the idea of Black Myth Wukong actually being successful and good. But then there's a bunch of stuff on here that doesn't make sense. Balatro is one of those games. Balatro, I had no idea what that was before the Game Awards announced this list. It apparently is a roguelike deck building game based off of normal poker cards or something like that. Essentially, it's one farming simulator mechanic away from having the holy trinity of video game buzzwords in it. And when you look at it, you can probably tell that journalists probably voted for it just because it had good sales and they wanted to nominate something that was indie and artistic and retro looking. Almost the same thing for Metaphor ReFantazio. It's a Final Fantasy art style JRPG, but the story also deals with those woke ideas of racism and discrimination, so obviously they're going to try to put that on this list. Then you have two other controversial picks. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which is essentially part 2 of a remake of a game, which is weird because if we took Mass Effect 2, which I think to be one of the best games ever made, split it into 2 games, and then we tried to nominate the second half of that story, that game, as Game of the Year, it would seem really weird, which is why I don't think it should be on this list. And then probably most controversial is Elden Ring Shadows of the Erd Tree. Shadow of the Erd Tree is, of course, DLC for the original Elden Ring game. And you can only play Shadows of the Erd Tree if you get past a certain point in the original Elden Ring game. So for all purposes, this is part of the original Elden Ring game. It's not its own real game. Although it's large enough that it probably could have been. But it's not. It's DLC. It's an add-on. So why is it being nominated for Game of the Year when it's an add-on? Listen, if you're served a sandwich, that's a meal. But if you're served potato chips with your sandwich, you wouldn't consider those potato chips a completely different meal. We can also make arguments about things that were not put on this list that definitely should have been considered for Game of the Year. Why is Stellar Blade not on this list? Stellar Blade was a phenomenal game, and it sold like gangbusters. Why is Helldivers 2 not on this list? Even though it had the PSN controversy, and it's not as hot of a game anymore, when Helldivers 2 came out, it was one of the biggest phenomena in gaming of the entire year. You had hundreds of thousands of people playing Helldivers 2 when it came out, and most of them, the vast majority of them, I'm sure, never played Helldivers 1. That's the kind of phenomena that should generate a Game of the Year nomination from journalists, right? What about Dragon's Dogma 2? When that game came out, nobody could shut up about how it was going to be nominated for Game of the Year. Now it seems to be absolutely disappeared. And of course, we would be remiss to talk about Game of the Year without mentioning Palworld not being on this list. Palworld should definitely be nominated for Game of the Year because it is one of the biggest gaming stories of the year, period, that journalists are still making articles about because it's still culturally relevant. And guess what? It sold really well, and it's also a very good game. But Palworld isn't nominated for anything. Not Game of the Year, not anything else on the Game Awards list. And why? Because we all know why. The Game Awards don't want to piss off Nintendo. The journalists that vote on this thing, they want access to Nintendo games. And if they even think about voting for Palworld to win anything, they're going to be denied access by Nintendo because Nintendo, with all their lawsuits, are obviously pretty vindictive when it comes to Palworld or anybody that tries to emulate or copy their games. One other notable game, but for a negative reason, that is nowhere near any of these lists, especially Game of the Year, is Dragon Age Veilguard. Which makes sense because while Dragon Age Veilguard is in the cultural zeitgeist, and while it is being talked about in articles, that's pretty much the only place it's being talked about. And if it's being talked about anywhere else, it's people lampooning it and talking about how terrible it is. You even have articles like this being written by people at The Gamer, and The Gamer is not a conservative institution writing based articles all the time. This article is entitled, Dragon Age the Veilguard is that friend that's too woke. And basically the entire article is talking about how Dragon Age Veilguard is like a person that's on all the time when it comes to woke leftist ideology and policies. The kind of person that can't even take a joke or give a joke or just live their normal life without mentioning pronouns. And I can tell you, from seeing the game played, that really is what it's like. Even the Ackman is trolling this thing, saying, played a few hours of Dragon Age the Veilguard, there's no way in hell this game is going to win anything at the Game Awards. My God, this is atrocious. Even the Ackman, who railed against heel versus babyface about his pronouns rant, is saying that this game is absolutely terrible. So you can tell that this game, not just from a woke standpoint, but from just a basic mechanic standpoint, is absolutely atrocious. And it's led us to articles like this. From Polygon, there was one big snub in the Game Awards nominations. Dragon Age Veilguard, a game engineered to succeed at the Game Awards, did not. Now, I've seen posts by people like Grums trying to say that this is Polygon simping for Dragon Age Veilguard, essentially. And while they probably do like the game when it was truly awful, in this article, it doesn't really come off that they're shilling for Dragon Age or upset that Dragon Age wasn't mentioned in the awards. That's just a load of BS. The article does state the Game Awards aren't known for much in the way of shock and surprise, and so it proved with the 2024 nominees. Fairly well-rounded list in which most of the year's best reviewed and best loved games got some love, unless it's Game of the Year, where that list was absolutely ridiculous from what you saw. But there was one title very striking for its almost complete absence, Dragon Age the Veilguard. The Game Awards voting jury snubbed BioWare's latest game in a series of key categories where it would have been expected to compete. It secured just one nomination for innovation in accessibility, which is decided by a specialist jury. Two things there. First, snubbed is not the word I would use here. Snubbed implies that it should be actually considered for nomination in Game of the Year or any of these categories. It shouldn't be because it was a terrible game. It is hated by gamers. It has terrible mechanics. It was buggy on launch. And it is chock filled with ideology from toe to hair of the head of the game. There's literally articles that state that this game is like it was written with HR standing over your shoulder. Second thing here, that award that it was nominated for, Innovation in Accessibility, that's basically a measure of how not cis, white, straight, and male is your video game. Also ableist too. We gotta throw our wheelchair peeps in there, which is why that accessibility award has a specialist jury. I highly doubt there's any cis, white, straight males on the jury that picks the Innovation in Accessibility award. Which, by the way, Dragon Age Veilguard is probably gonna win. So yeah, in conclusion, a lot of controversial picks, a lot of controversial not picks. One thing that isn't controversial though is that Dragon Age Veilguard isn't anywhere near the Game Awards this year. And the one award that it's nominated for and probably is going to win is the BS Accessibility Award, which is only there to appease the wokey crowd of the Gamer Awards. But those are just my thoughts on all this. If you have your own thoughts, go ahead and leave them in the comments. If you have any games or things that you think should have been nominated for certain awards, go ahead and let me know as well in the comments. If you liked this video, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe. If you didn't like this video, I appreciate you watching all of it, and we'll talk to you again later.